We are currently walking on Ray Field, and in a matter of minutes, a massive Confederate force would be streaming through this wood line and attacking through this position. Standing in their way is a lone Union regiment, the 53rd Ohio. Can they hold this position? That's what we're here to find out. So we are currently in the position of the 53rd Ohio. Now, Sherman instructed all the units in his division to camp north of East Branch, so the stream can act as a natural defensive barrier. The 53rd Ohio chose to move elsewhere, and they made their camp here due to the close proximity of Ray Spring, which offered drinking water. Now, the 53rd Ohio was commanded by Colonel Jesse Appler, and Appler was one of several Union officers who inundated Sherman with warnings of Confederate sightings just outside of the Union camps here. This, along with the rogue position of the 53rd, slightly annoyed Sherman. Now, on April 5th at approximately 4 p.m., one of Appler's officers observed mounted Confederate patrols on the south end of Ray Field. A patrol was sent out and fired upon by these Confederate troops. Appler ordered his regiment to fall in position and prepared for battle. Lieutenant Joseph Fulton was sent to inform Sherman of this contact. Sherman would reply, "Colonel, take your damn regiment back to Ohio. There is no enemy nearer than Corinth." The next morning, on April 6 of 1862, Colonel Appler would dispatch a 16-man patrol, and they would report a sizable enemy force, along with encountering several wounded soldiers from the 25th Missouri who had made contact with this force. One of these wounded soldiers from the 25th Missouri warned the 53rd Ohio to get ready for battle. Sherman was again notified and again dismissed Appler's warning. So here you have the camp of the 53rd Ohio. Now, once Appler dispatched his 16-man patrol and they encountered that sizable force, Appler would get his men into line of battle and he would orient them in this direction here. Now, Appler would see Confederate troops west of our position, which is the direction we're facing now, and then he would spot Confederate forces on the southern end of Ray Field. So he would orient his regiment to now face south. Now, Appler quickly realized that this was a sizable Confederate force, and he was in a vulnerable position, so he would pull back his men to a third and final position at the edge of Ray Field, and he would pull back his troops to that wood line before us here. So right now we're facing west once again, and the Confederate soldiers that were spotted were part of Patrick Cleburne's brigade, and they were moving in this direction here beyond the wood line. They would encounter some rough terrain, and his brigade would not only become bogged down, they would essentially break apart, and the 6th Mississippi along with the 23rd Tennessee would break off and begin advancing towards Ray Field here, and they would emerge from this wood line. Now, it's important to note that Ray Field would extend a little further beyond what you're seeing today, but you would have had the 6th Mississippi directly to our front, and on their right flank, which is our left, the 23rd Tennessee was in this direction here, and holding this area was a lone Union regiment, the 53rd Ohio. Now, as the 53rd Ohio was being repositioned, you had the 6th Mississippi and the 23rd Tennessee advancing directly at us on the camera. General Sherman and 2 aides personally rode out to Ray Field just to see what was unfolding. And upon arriving in this area, Lieutenant Eustace Ball would warn Sherman that there were skirmishers on his flank, and just as he did this, they let loose a volley of buck and ball, and one of Sherman's orderlies, Sergeant Thomas Holliday, was struck in the head and killed instantly. Sherman himself would raise his hand and be struck in the hand. Now, Sherman would reply, "My God, we are attacked." Well, yes, people have been trying to warn you of this, but now Sherman would ride back to his division headquarters, which is near the Shiloh church, and begin preparing the remainder of his division for battle. While that's happening, the 6th Mississippi and the 23rd Tennessee are emerging from this wood line behind me.
Shortly after General Sherman departs Ray Field, the men of the 6th Mississippi and 23rd Tennessee emerge from the woodline and begin their advance. The men of the 53rd Ohio held their fire. As the Confederate troops advanced, the camp of the 53rd Ohio inadvertently broke up the Confederate formations and caused confusion. Then once through the camp, the white Sibley tents perfectly silhouetted the advancing Confederate troops, making them perfect targets. The two regiments closed to within about 50 yards of the 53rd Ohio when they let loose their first volley. Dozens of men dropped lifeless to the ground. The green troops of the 23rd Tennessee broke almost immediately, yet the men of the 6th Mississippi held their ground. One of the Ohio soldiers recalls the events of the first charge.
We fired 4 times and killed 50 within the limits of our camp, for we buried them ourselves on Tuesday.
Now, the initial attack here on the 53rd Ohio lasted only a few minutes. There's reports that the 53rd only fired about 4 to 5 shots. So if you're a trained soldier, you can fire 2 to 3 in a minute. So that's only a few minute fight. Now, the 6th Mississippi suffered heavy casualties. The 23rd Tennessee to our right flank broke completely, leaving the 6th Mississippi exposed. Now, they would pull back, regroup, and make 2 more charges alone. In one of those charges, Colonel John Thornton, the commander of the 6th Mississippi, would see his colors fall. He would pick up the colors and lead that second charge, or he would be severely wounded. Now, Major Robert Lowry is now in command of the 6th Mississippi. He would be severely wounded on the third charge, and the casualties here are just mounting for the 6th Mississippi. We're also being hit on our flank by a battery near Sherman's headquarters. Waterhouse's battery is absolutely raking this field with shot and shell, and the men of the 6th Mississippi are charging this field alone through the Union camp. Now, one interesting note about Colonel Thornton here is he was actually against secession when he was part of the committee to vote for it or against it. He voted against it. And now here he is leading the 6th Mississippi across Ray Field here. And now he's severely wounded.
This was my first experience in being shot at, and I was scared as the next man. Everyone was moving forward, hollering at the top of their lungs. We just had to get at those Federals who were shooting at us. There was no time to help the wounded. Most of the men on the ground were our close friends, neighbors, kinfolk. Lieutenant William Thompson, 6th Mississippi Infantry.
So now we moved over to the Union perspective here. We are in the position of the 53rd Ohio on the east side of Ray Field, and the 6th Mississippi and the 23rd Tennessee would be emerging from that far wood line, charging directly at us here. Now, I want to give you a clear shot, so I'm going to come out of the woods just a tad. So we touched on how the Union camp was in the middle of the field, and when the Confederates advanced through that camp, it not only broke up their formations, it silhouetted them and created nice targets to the men of the 53rd in this wood line here. And that first attack was repulsed with relative ease. And then the 6th Mississippi made that second and third attack across this field alone. And they suffered nearly 300 casualties assaulting across this field, nearly 70% of their regiment, just in about an hour of fighting here. Now, something to note as well, we mentioned Waterhouse's battery was absolutely raking the field here. They were about 300 yards back in this direction, closer to the Shiloh church. Now, there was a section of artillery from his battery brought up right here, and then they were pulled back rather quickly here when things started getting hot and heavy. And Waterhouse's battery really helped the 53rd Ohio hold this position here. Now, something a little strange happened after the repel of the third attack by the 6th Mississippi. Colonel Jesse Appler became rattled. Something got to him, and all of a sudden, he yelled to the regiment, "Retreat and save yourselves." Then the regiment became panicked and fled this area, heading towards Pittsburgh Landing. Now, some companies were rallied and fought with the rest of Sherman's division near the Shiloh church, but the 53rd Ohio, despite its success here in repelling numerous Confederate attacks, their leader became rattled and the regiment broke here in this location. Now, after the Battle of Shiloh, Appler would be dismissed from the army and deemed unfit from command on April 18th of 1862. But, part of me really feels for him. He warned Sherman numerous times about this Confederate advance, appropriately positioned his regiment on a very strong position, repelled 3 Confederate attacks, and then something happened to him. Something rattled him, and like we touched on, he was deemed unfit for leadership and dismissed from the army. But, think about all the men placed in just these awful situations. This is early in the war. They've received little training. Really, both armies still don't know the carnage that lies ahead in the American Civil War. And you have men stepping up to the plate and leading by example. But you also have a lot of men being rattled and being deemed unfit, like Appler here. So just one of those weird occurrences where, he performed quite well, and then all of a sudden, something flipped in Appler's mind, and you can think about what he had just witnessed, and you can't help but feel for people in that situation.
Colonel Appler simply traveled and cried retreat, not telling us how or where to rally. We rallied without his help twice, only to hear and see the same thing repeated minus the firing on the enemy. The last time he hurried 3 miles to a steamboat, leaving us to look out for ourselves. Sergeant Milton K. Bosworth, 53rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry.
Now, we've been covering the actions taking place in Ray Field, which is 300 yards in this direction here. You can just make it out through that wood line here. Now, we mentioned that there was Union artillery from Captain Allen Waterhouse's battery firing into Ray Field. Well, this was his position. Now, we touched on he brought up a 2-gun section into Ray Field, and that section was pulled back to link up with the rest of the battery at this location here. And you can just see the fields of fire from Waterhouse's battery. Again, Ray Field is just ahead of us. You have the 6th Mississippi advancing, and the battery here just absolutely pouring shot into the 6th Mississippi's flank. And that is one of the main reasons why casualties were so high in Ray Field. But I just wanted to show you where Waterhouse's battery was. And just to tie things together a bit, Sherman's line near the Shiloh church, I would say, is probably about 100 yards in this direction here. And the Union line ran in that direction. And before us here is Ray Field and the 53rd Ohio and the 6th Mississippi duking it out on the field before us here. So now what you're looking at here is the monument to the 6th Mississippi Infantry. And we touched on it a bit, but after 3 assaults across this field lasting a little less than an hour, they lost 300 men killed, wounded, and captured out of 425 men they brought to the field here. And after the actions here, the 6th Mississippi became known as the Bloody Sixth. And you can just see just an absolutely beautiful monument. And like most monuments, they use a bit of symbolism. And you can see, looks like the color bearer being wounded or killed in action as 2 other soldiers try to grab the flag before it hits the ground and keep charging forward. And, this gives you just a small little snapshot of what transpired right here on the morning of April 6th of 1862 at around 7:45 a.m.
So we touched on the horrific casualties that the 6th Mississippi suffered on Ray Field, which is just before us here. For orientation purposes, this is the camp of the 53rd Ohio. And at the southern edge of Ray Field here is one of 5 known Confederate burial trenches here. Now, no doubt that there are men from the 6th Mississippi buried in the trench before us here. I have no idea how many men are here, but This is one of 5 known Confederate burial trenches here on the Shiloh battlefield, and it's also believed that there's 12 total burial trenches here. So there's about 7 burial trenches that are unaccounted for. But I wanted to share this one here at Ray Field since we're here, and here lies an unknown number of Confederate soldiers from, I'm assuming, various regiments, including the 6th Mississippi, who lost 300 men killed, wounded, and captured at Ray Field just behind us here.